Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody's had a good week so far. Hope everybody's enjoying their Friday morning. Got a pretty loaded show for you guys. We're going to be all over the place in terms of the ground that we cover. I'm going to play about a 30-minute conversation with my good friend, longtime guest of the show, Kevin Lytle. I don't think there's anybody we've had on the podcast more frequently over the years than Kevin Lytle, the Fort Collins, Coloradoan, terrific local journalist. Does a great job covering CSU men's basketball as well as CSU football. And I just kind of picked his brain on the futures of both programs. We talked about some thoughts on the roster as currently constructed. We talked a little bit about expectations and the pressure to succeed, the varying factors that go into that with both programs. It's not just as simple as, we always want to win. We talk about the actual context for both programs and just kind of what you have to factor when assessing where the program is at right now, what would be successful next season, all of that fun stuff. Kevin does a really great job, and I think you guys are going to enjoy the conversation quite a bit. At the beginning here, I am going to get into the transfer portal, talk about the latest additions for CSU football. I've been really impressed with the way that the staff has been able to fill positions of needs. Basically every single potential weakness that we have outlined or talked about at any point throughout this spring, we have now seen CSU address those needs via the transfer portal. And I think in some ways it probably helps that you're coming off of an 8-win season. Your national reputation is maybe in a little bit better of a place than it was. But I also think what's really been big for CSU is the financial commitment and the investment in this program on the recruiting side. And in particular, not just like recruiting analysts and stuff like that, but bringing in a legitimate general manager in Alex Collins, bringing a guy over from Ole Miss who had a ton of experience swimming in these waters. Ole Miss has kind of been at the forefront of some of this portal madness we've seen in recent years, and I have plenty of complaints. I have plenty of issues with the current system that we have in college football and as much player movement as we currently have. I don't think it's good for the players. I don't think it's good for the health of the game overall. But it is what it is. So there's no point in yelling at the sky, doing an old man rant day after day. This is what college football is. And the reality is that every program is going to both benefit and at times feel the negative consequences of the portal. You're going to lose some guys. You're going to gain some guys. That just kind of is what it is now. Again, I think it's hard for the fans to commit and to be invested in the same way just because there is so much roster movement. It's hard to keep up with. I do this for a living, and it's challenging to keep up with at times. So let alone if you're just a casual college football fan who, wanted to tune in once a week on Saturday, aren't necessarily living and breathing this, the type of people that aren't listening to these shows and stuff every day. There's a lot of college football fans like that. But in previous years, you would see those same faces for 3-4 years at a time. It allowed you to get to know them a little bit, allowed you to just be familiar with the program. And that's becoming increasingly challenging. And that's one of the major factors that I just don't think is great for the overall health of college football or the future of the sport or anything like that. I do think there's obviously some positives that have come out of it as well. I think it makes sense for the players to be able to make money. I think it makes sense for them to even be able to transfer. Before it was too far the other way in terms of how restrictive that process was. I think that there's probably more parity in college football right now than there was 10 years ago. I think you're seeing it become increasingly more challenging for programs like CSU, for programs like Boise State, to maintain continuity and have sustained success over a multi-year period, because I mean, the stats prove it. You know, so many of these G5 conference players, all conference players, end up transferring up. But I think when you look at the top 25, the amount of teams that realistically have an opportunity to contend, to be in the mix, to potentially win a national championship, I think right now the number is bigger than it was, you know, at the beginning of the college football playoff era with just the 4 teams. When you go back to like 2014, I think for a significant stretch there, realistically, there were like 5-6 teams that had a chance. And I think that list is probably at least doubled. And it has to do with even those top programs, as much as they can take talent from places like CSU, like Boise State, they can't stockpile talent in the same way, because guys as a whole aren't willing to sit around for 2, 3, 4 years in hopes of someday seeing the field. And that was a big part of the success of places like Alabama. You know, it's well known that I'm a big Nick Saban guy. I know most people hated Alabama, and I get it. If I didn't like them, I'd probably feel the same way. But a big part of what allowed them to have that sustained run of dominance was the fact that they just had a never-ending line of 5-star talent to throw out there. One guy went down, you had 3, 4 more on the roster, a couple of guys that had already been working behind the scenes, developing for years, and it just made it so much easier to maintain that consistent level of dominance. That's not to say that the halves are going to just completely become irrelevant, or like that these great programs are no longer going to be able to, you know, be great for consistent periods of time here. Like they're great programs, the Blue Bloods, the names you already know, they're always still going to be at the top of the sport. I just think that it has helped elevate some of these other programs that were maybe knocking on the door but weren't quite there. The Michigans of the world. You know, I just think even Ole Miss is a good example, a program that's maybe elevated a little bit in this modern era. But yeah, that was a bit of a tangent that I didn't mean to go on. Happens. Before we get into the latest portal additions for CSU football, I did just want to say shout out to Jalen Lake. CSU men's basketball posted a graphic, and it's no secret, I've been a big supporter of Jalen Lake over the years. I just think he's a rare breed in an era of players that frankly are all about me. You know, what's in it for me? What can I get out of this? How do I benefit? And Jalen Lake was just the ultimate teammate, man. Like there aren't a lot of people that would have been willing to go back to the bench after, you know, starting in their sophomore year, even like having the reduced role the last couple of years, taking a back seat to some of these other guys that have come in, never complained about it, has just done all the things the right way. And he's a CSU Ram legend because of it. 91 career wins, the winningest player at CSU ever. 3 NCAA tournament appearances plus an NIT semifinal. Shout out to Jalen Lake, an all-time great Ram. Shout out to the Colorado Eagles as well for advancing to the 3rd round of the AHL playoffs, the Pacific Division Finals. You know, obviously we're the CSU show, but the Eagles are a big part of Northern Colorado, and that's a team that's always had great support. The community buys in. The atmosphere is sick. If you've never been to an Eagles game, they are admittedly a little bit pricey for the AHL. I think that's one thing that could help grow the interest in the team as a whole, would be having it be a little bit more accessible, a little bit more affordable. A great way to maybe incentivize some families that can't afford NHL tickets to go experience some professional hockey in an intimate setting. It really is a cool experience. I don't quite get the decision to build a new arena. I don't feel like it's necessary, but I don't know all the details behind the scenes on all of that. But shout out to the Colorado Eagles, you know, Northern Colorado zone. We try and rep NOCO as much as we can on this show. All right. Now that we've rambled for almost 10 minutes, that was supposed to be a 2-minute intro. Classic JTM gets to rambling about stupid shit, but let's get into it. Let's talk about Dennious Jackson, I believe is how you pronounce it. The latest addition for CSU football, 6'5", 338-pound defensive tackle. He transfers over from Kentucky, played a couple of seasons of JUCO ball out in California, signed with the Wildcats last year. Did not see any game action, but was in the program for a year. Obviously, what stands out is that size, 6'5", 338-pound frame. I had said on a couple of occasions that while I do really like the defensive linemen that they have on campus right now, I felt like they were maybe a little light in the interior. I just didn't feel like they had a true run stuffer that you put in the middle. There's some guys that are going to be versatile. I think Lorich is going to be a stud. I think Moran, some of these other guys can be impactful players for you. You bring over Gabe Jones from New Mexico State. I like him a lot as well, and I think he maybe has the versatility to play inside or outside, kind of like a Malik Jackson with the Broncos back in the day. But Dennious Jackson is a true run stuffer, man. I mean, he's a power rusher, is going straight up the gut. There's nothing cute. There's nothing fancy about his game. He's big, but he actually moves pretty well despite that massive frame that he has. You know, you look at some of the JUCO film, obviously you have to take some of the success with a grain of salt, just given the level of competition that he's going against. I would hope that a man with his type of size would be able to, you know, move some of those JUCO O linemen around. And you see that it's again, it's not cute. It's just him kind of shucking the offensive lineman, trying to make a play in the backfield. Had a really nice sophomore season. Again, didn't really do much at Kentucky this past year, but, you know, obviously they're going to have pretty great depth in the SEC. As a sophomore, he had 30 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. That's really solid for an interior defensive lineman. And I think he's a guy that can come in and hopefully, you know, be impactful and create some havoc in the backfield, maybe rush the quarterback a little bit, you know, create some production in terms of tackles for loss. But really what I think he can help you do, very similarly to like what we saw from Cam Barata the last couple of years, is I think he can eat bodies in the interior and open up space for guys, you know, from that second level to come in. He's going to really benefit those linebackers. And frankly, he just gives you a little bit of size, which you needed. I think they've got some good athletes in that defensive line, but size is a factor in this sport. And to add somebody with that type of frame, but that carries it well. I mean, there are guys that are 6'4 plus, 300 plus pounds, and they're just a sack of potatoes out there. They can't move. Again, it's JUCO film, but I like what I see from Jackson. I had offers from Arkansas State, Florida International, North Texas, South Alabama, Southern Mississippi, and Texas State. I was kind of deep diving on him, read some former interviews and stuff like that. He can play the trombone, loves to garden and barbecue, so kind of an interesting personality. I'm all about it. I read that, you know, he was kind of an academic type growing up, wasn't really focused on football. Then he hit a big growth spurt in high school. I think he's somebody that can be a productive player for you in the program. Obviously, not that information translates to football, but I always like when guys are interesting and have versatile backgrounds. And I hope we can get him on the podcast at some point and pick his brain on some of this stuff. If you missed it, the Rams also filled another key position of need. It's funny, man. Earlier in the spring, we talked about edge rusher and receiver without Lewis Brown being areas where you like the guys that you had, but you certainly could use another one. They did that. They went out and got Paul Tangelo to match the guys that they already have. They bring in P.D. Tucker, wide receiver from Georgia State. And then after that, you know, I felt like they had hit all the major needs, and this is actually something we talk about with Kevin yesterday, because the interview we recorded was right before this recruiting news. But if you would have pointed to, you know, potential positions they needed, kicker, they filled that a couple of days ago. And Isaiah Hankins, we're going to talk about him here in just a second. But interior defensive line was probably the most glaring hole, just in terms of where they could use another body. And I've really been impressed with the way that the staff has so quickly filled these positions of needs. And I feel like having an actual GM and having, you know, more resources in terms of the portal is something that will be big for CSU. I think you're already seeing the program reap the benefits of that. Now, you still have to win games, and I get into it with Kevin, but obviously there's significant expectations coming into this season, and it's kind of a make or break year for the program under Jay Norvell. Now, I'm not trying to be sensationalistic or dramatic. You guys, if you've listened to the show, you know I'm a pretty big supporter of Jay Norvell's. I think what would be best for this program in the long term would be to maintain continuity because I just think starting over from zero puts you in a really terrible spot. But it's a results business, and obviously the results have to come in order to have continuity. So we'll get to that interview with Kevin Lytle here in just a couple of moments. I'm going to talk about Isaiah Hankins here in just a second. We are going to take a quick breather, and we are going to pay a couple of our bills. I want to talk to you guys about the Hall of Fame app. It's awesome, really great to use. They've got great options on there. One of the things that's cool about the Hall of Fame app, hear me out, we've all been there. Your parlay's one leg away. The relief pitcher gives up a walk-off bomb in the ninth. Heartbreak. Sound familiar? The Hall of Fame app is built to fix that. Started by two lifelong sports fans who also happen to be Ivy League grads. Hall of Fame's makes parlay research smarter, faster, and data-driven. This isn't just a group chat with your buddies, throwing out hot takes and gut feels. They're using advanced stats and historical data and so many different tools to help you bet smarter. Really, really cool. Whether it's the MLB, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, or college sports, the app gives you beautiful charts, clean visuals, real insight, not hype. They believe anything the books know, you should know too. Our listeners get a 7-day free trial and 50% off their first month. Just download the Hall of Fame app or visit halloffamebets.com. Use the code DNVR at checkout. Maybe the best part, once you built your parlay, you can send it straight to your sportsbook with one click, no manual entry, no wasted time. The Hall of Fame app syncs automatically with the most major sportsbooks like DraftKings, FanDuel, all the ones you know. Again, for a limited time only, our listeners not only get a 7-day free trial, but they also get 50% off their first month when they use the code DNVR at checkout. Just download the Hall of Fame app on iOS or Android and visit HOFbets.com. Enter the code DNVR and you are all set. Easy as that. I also want to talk to you guys about First Bank. We've got all kinds of new partners now, which is really cool. Shout out to the people behind the scenes making all of this possible. Of course, my computer froze up here for a second, but that's live TV, baby. We'll get to it. I want to talk to you guys about First Bank. Like I said here, whether you're on the road or at home, First Bank is great. Cool. The ad's just not coming up for me, so that's not great. All right, we're gonna move on. So sorry about that. We'll have to do a makeup read for First Bank later in the show if I can get it to pull up. But the computer's freezing on me. We'll get to that in just a second. Good morning to Crackers College Hoops in the Toyota chat. Much love, Steve. Appreciate you tuned in. We're gonna play part one of our interview with Kevin Lytle. And again, this is about a 30-minute conversation. Then we'll give some thoughts on what he says at the end. I hope you guys enjoy it. And I appreciate Kevin for giving us some of his time. In the Maryland finish, or Mikko Rantanen coming back to be the Grim Reaper for the Avalanche?
That's a good question. That's a tough question. For me, it's the...
All right, we have got Kevin Lytle, the Fort Collins Coloradoan, on, one of the great sports journalists in the state, longtime friend of mine and a frequent partner of the show. First things first, you're a big hockey guy like myself. Obviously, the Avalanche are coming off of a rough one, and it had me thinking, what was a bigger gut punch, do you think? Derek Queen in the Maryland finish, or Mikko Rantanen coming back to be the Grim Reaper for the Avalanche?
That's a good question. That's a tough question. For me, it's the Mikko and Avs, because I just watch that as a fan. Whereas the Queen one, obviously there are a lot of work impacts for me, but it's, a work day. So I just different kind of emotions attached to it. So for me personally, the Mikko one, because I'm just sitting on my couch being pissed off at the TV rather than, sitting there working, kind of regardless of the result. But that's certainly, obviously there are a lot of folks here that both those were pretty rough finishes for a lot of people here in the Northern Colorado community.
I think the NCAA tournament and the NHL playoffs are my favorite forms of the sports postseason. So for both of them to end that way, I was like, come on, man, like just give me a little bit.
Crazy ways for both those teams to go out.
This is like classic offseason banter, but I've been talking about all kinds of random stuff on the shows of late, and one of the things that came up was this subject of like, what are the top sports moments on the calendar? And mine probably changes based on the year, based on like how exciting, certain teams are. But I threw out, like the NCAA tournament. I still love the World Series, even though the Rockies are just gross. I think from a competitive standpoint, it's awesome. You can't go wrong with like the Super Bowl or stuff like that. What would your top four though? Like, what's your top four annual ones? So we'll throw out the Olympics and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Throw out Olympics, World Cup, things like that. Um, I think the opening of the NCAA tournament is always right there. I just love that. Really, that whole weekend. The Thursday through Sunday is pretty epic. Honestly, in some ways, Saturday, Sundays may be the best. But either way, the just that opening weekend, the NCAA tournament is always incredible. Super Bowl, obviously, like you say, can ebb a little bit depending on matchup or whoever. But still, even if it's a game that I don't particularly, you know, have investment in or whatever, it's gotta be one I'm gonna watch. So that's always up there. For me, the Champions League final is pretty high up there. Again, obviously, always a little matchup dependent, but it's actually a game I frequently miss because it tends to, or it's always, kind of late May, which sometimes I'm wrapped up helping with some other like high school playoff coverage. So I sometimes can't watch it live, which is kind of a bummer for a thing I say is one of my top four. And then yeah, hey, I like the Masters like this year for sure was tuned in Sunday. I wouldn't say it's necessarily an annual big one, kind of depending on what's going on. CFP, title game can be again a little bit matchup dependent. Opening day for baseball, I would say used to be, but the shine has been taken
Yeah,
off
that's one
that by
that's
a certain franchise. I mean, I still appreciate it and kind of enjoy the return of baseball, but it's lost its luster a bit for me. Stanley Cup final, obviously that's a series rather than a one-off, but again, matchup dependent, but I do always love that. So I've listed like 100 things, so I'm cheating, but those are some of the top ones for me.
yeah, I picked a bad year to try and recapture my love for baseball, I'll say that. So I
Yeah.
tried and we'll just say that. It was a try on my effort. I did not succeed. Um,
Well,
there's
that
been
that
a lot of
fits with
oh, go ahead, sorry.
that fits with the franchise. I try, but I don't succeed.
I honestly hope they break the record at this point. I don't know what else is going to get them to change, so
Yeah, no,
why
I'm
not?
I'm I haven't watched much, but honestly, it's kind of hate watch. To be very frank, for me,
Ugh, it's tough. It's tough. There've
just
been
sad.
there've been a lot of talks about jersey retirement, obviously based on the we'll just say the local news around here. It's generated some debate amongst Ram fans regarding, the whole topic and what the standard should be and how long it should be and all of that. And I do think it's an interesting debate just because I think some teams probably go overboard. I think if you retire, like the Yankees, for instance, have like 30 numbers retired, it feels a bit much. I know they have a proud history. John Mosley was a layup. Like it was insane that it took them that
Should
long
have
to
been
do it in the
done
first place.
decades ago. Yeah,
Trey will get it at some point. He meets the rules they have in place. Isaiah Stevens, I assume, will get it on the basketball side. How long should CSU wait to honor those guys? And is there anybody else that should be in that mix? Because when I honestly, I can't really think of anybody that would be a glaring miss on their part.
yeah. It's one of those. Yeah, over the past couple years, and even before the Shitter Sanders thing, it was in discussion a lot because obviously we were talking about the number fours, with basketball. And in hindsight now, I probably got swept up in a little bit of like I know I did a column of like here's how they should do it. Basically retire number four. At the showdown the following year because it's before basketball really gets going. You could have Zay back and all that. Now it's like actually I don't think you should do it that quickly. Like 100% should retire. Isaiah's number four. But I think waiting is good. I think with Trey likewise. I mean it should I think will be retired eventually, but I think give it some time, let it ride out. I'm okay with basically wait till their career is over because especially Trey in football, you would want to do that at a football game. I mean, I guess maybe you could get a bye week to line up, but otherwise, Trey wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to be there, which it's kind of dumb to retire a number if the guy can't be there. Um, so I'm okay with a waiting period. I think, I forget what CSU's exact number is. I don't know if I have an exact number in my head, but I kind of like the let their career ride out and then you can do it. But those are the two that I think need to be done and will be done. And yeah, there aren't really others. I know Shaq Barrett's name gets thrown out. He's a fringer to me. I'm not sure if he's a retirement. I mean, he's obviously had a great pro career. He was a very good college player, but um, there are a lot of those. So he's one that's kind of close, but I'd maybe need to dive into volleyball history a bit more. They're a tricky one because they've had so many really, really good players, like all American level players. That if you open the door of like, well, if you're an all American, well, then you're putting up 40 numbers, that type of thing. So volleyball is almost they've had too much success that you would have to be really, really, really special. So they're a tricky one too, but I think Trey and Isaiah are probably the first two that kind of not imminently, but soonish will happen. Mosley, yeah, kudos to John Weber and that, the whole team that put that together, because that was one of those I knew John Mosley's story, but I think as you dove more into it, it's like, what on earth was why had this not happened decades ago? So good job on that one. And I think no need to rush on anything else. So I think you can do an in between, I think there's some discussion of like Ring of Honor type thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Broncos have, or I like that a lot. I mean, that's a way to honor some people, sort of tiered honoring, I guess, if you will, and make that jersey retirement. That's one place I do tend to agree with Joe Parker, which there aren't a lot of them, is that should be a very high bar to be a jersey retirement.
It's got to be like the ultimate honor. Like in some ways, like I feel like it's maybe even more significant than like the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's above Hall of Fame to me. I mean, it, obviously would be included in that, but yeah, I'd say, there's like jersey retirement, Hall of Fame, and Ring of Honor type things, and then some things like the whatchamacallit that they did this year.
The Hall of Champ, like whatever.
Yeah, Hall of Champions, whatever it's called. You can do some tiers of it because there are a lot of great athletes that should have some recognition, but doesn't have to be, I think a lot of those athletes that were, whatever, 2-time all conference, they're not thinking their number should be retired, but they're also like, hey, I did some good stuff on some good teams. Like, could maybe have my name somewhere. And I agree.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just think it's one of those we get too swept up in, like when the Avs traded Mikko Rantanen, for instance. I had a lot of people be like, they were going to retire his number. And I was like, I don't know about that. Like, he's a great Av, one of my favorite of all time, deserves to be recognized probably in some way. But like, I don't know, jersey retirement, that's got to be like the one name that comes to mind when you even associate like with that program, like Elway and the Broncos or something. You got to be synonymous with it.
I don't even know if this is a take, just a comment. I think the number matters a little bit. So like, I thought the Avs retiring Ray Bork's number was a little silly because he didn't play with them for very long. Obviously, he's a legend of the game, and they did win a cup. But for an Av, like he wasn't, he didn't transform the franchise. Yeah. But I'm also like, it's 77. Nobody wants to wear it. Yeah. So kind of who cares? So that's like I say, it's kind of nonsensical, and I guess.
You're not wrong though. Like 4 in basketball, 85 in football. Those are premium numbers.
It's kind of funny. I don't mind the Bork one partially because it's a number that no one's gonna wear.
I've never thought of that take, but I'm with you. I don't know, but I get what he meant to hockey history and all that, and that's a whole tangent we could go on. But I'm with you. I do actually have some questions for you about the teams you cover. I know I wanted to just shoot the shit a little bit, but obviously a lot of focus on the changes with basketball, and along with some coaching changes. Kyan lands at UNC. You and I told the fans for weeks and weeks he was getting some pretty significant interest. I don't think that was shocking. Obviously, Jalen Crocker-Johnson follows Nico to Minnesota. Everybody knows that kind of stuff. But What are your thoughts on this transfer class? And we don't have to talk about every guy individually, but how do you feel like the staff did in terms of addressing their positions of need?
Yeah, obviously on paper looks really good. There's some of the intangible aspect that we're not going to know until uh, maybe January, honestly, about how things fit and everything. Obviously this past year's team was the best example of that. Of in November, I mean, how many tweets and stuff did we get of people being like, "Why on earth did they bring this guy in? He can't play." And then once they figured out roles and fit and all that, it obviously meshed great. So it's hard to predict that, even for the coaches. They obviously are doing their best to try and make sure they get that right fit. But anyone that says they know 100% right now what their team is going to be is lying. But I like it. I actually had a chance to talk to Ali Farokhmanesh Wednesday, had a good chat about a lot of different things. I'll a story on that probably early next week. But obviously he likes his class. It's become a cliche to say positionless basketball, but it's for a reason because it's become such a thing. And I think this is what you have a lot of guys that can do. A guy like Jevin can probably play the 2, the 3, Pasquarelli, the 1, the 2, Rex Steiner, the 1, the 2, Booth can play a few positions. I didn't even know this until Ali was telling me that Augie, until a couple of years ago, was more a guard. He was like 6'3", 6'4", had a growth spurt, and now is a big, but has guard almost mentality and skill set that he's now combined with his big body and big skill set. So obviously he has a lot of versatility with that. So it's just a group that you can see doing a lot of things. And even some of the everyone gets excited about the new guys, understandably, but the returning guys too. I mean, Darnez Slater is a guy that I'm really excited about. John McConan, if he can put together, is just an incredible athlete. Obviously we saw some of Jorgensen rode that freshman wave, but you can certainly see the player in there. Obviously we know what Bimba is. Joppa obviously showed some stuff. So you just have a lot of pieces. And I sit there, and one of the things I'm thinking right now is you're going to have a heck of a battle for minutes.
All right, we will get right back to that conversation with Kevin Lytle. We'll talk more about basketball, and then we'll pivot on to football. We do need to take one quick break. Had some technical issues last time. I will talk about the latest kicker edition for the program, Isaiah Hankins, as well. The computer froze up on me, and I panicked. I just sent it to the interview, so I jumped the gun a little bit there. I will talk about Isaiah Hankins in the final segment. Let's shout out First Bank, who's an awesome new partner, and despite my technological struggles, deserves a much better read. So whether on the road, at home, or somewhere in between, First Bank makes banking easy, convenient, and secure. Their mobile banking app allows you to check balances, pay friends, and manage your money anytime, anywhere. Here's the best part. Open a new First Bank checking account today, and you could earn $300. First Bank is all about helping you stay on track. The tools make it simple to stay in control of your finances without the hassle. No matter where life takes you, First Bank gives you the freedom to bank how and when it works best for you. So if you're ready to get better banking and you want the chance to earn a little bit extra, head to efirstbank.com/bonus. That's efirstbank.com/bonus to open your account. Bank how you want, when you want with First Bank. Certain restrictions and requirements apply. Member FDIC. I also want to shout out some older partners, some that you're a little bit more familiar with, starting with our good friends over at Coors Light. Coors Light encourages you to choose a chill mindset this spring. You know the drill, guys. Life throws a lot at us. It can be, frankly, exhausting at times. It can be daunting, but it's all about the little choices. Go outside, get some sunshine, walk the dog, get your chores in. Then when you've earned it, when you're in that right state of mind, kick back, put the feet up, relax, and crack open an ice-cold Coors Light. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Choose chill, then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR or find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Also got to shout out Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR, a proud partner of CSU Athletics as well. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. They've got options for anything you're into. Just cruising Cap Hill, you're good. You want to hit the mountains, you're also good. Toyota offers 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, which is perfect for living in Colorado. They've got 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, and they offer more low and zero emission vehicles combined than any other automaker. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right, like I said, we will talk about the latest transfer addition, Isaiah Hankins, Baylor multi-year starter at kicker. Really an intriguing addition. I'm surprised Baylor let him get away, so we'll talk about him at the end. But here is part 2 of that conversation with Kevin Lytle, and we'll also react to some of what he says here over the next 16 minutes or so. A fairly big role for this team, and it's going to be interesting to see how quickly they can get the pieces to gel together. Yeah. Who ultimately fills what? Like, are you a 2 or are you a 3? Maybe you're similar to both. I think it'll provide the staff with some versatility in terms of the lineups they're able to throw out. If you had to pinpoint, and this is way too early, way too early, who do you feel like out of these new guys is the front runner to make like the biggest impact right away? I'd probably throw out Augie if I had to pick one. I just think his versatility, I think he quietly was a very, very big pickup and a highly skilled guy. But where are you at just in terms of who could maybe make the biggest impact year one?
Yeah, I'm with you. I like him and his addition. I tend to, there's obviously the attraction of the, very high ranked recruit that was either miscast or misused at a P4. Obviously, Nick Clifford went from kind of being, maybe pushed toward the door down in Boulder to a top 15 pick. So it's easy to want to recreate that, and they may, maybe they will with one of these guys. But I tend to lean on the guys that have had big success in college, and that's where Augie and Pasquarelli jump out to me, and Rex Steiner a little bit. He's one of those in between of like he played it's not like he was
he played. It's not like he was a bench warmer.
But Pasquarelli, it's a lesser conference. No offense to the MAAC, but he did a lot of good stuff. So I think him and Augie are two that jump to me of like they've been through and seen a lot at the college level already. Yes, this is a different level, but they may day one be able to step in, do a lot of stuff. Whereas, like a Booth, for instance, may need a little bit of adjustment period to a system and playing time and role just because of all the change he's had to go through.
I'm with you. I think Pasquarelli is a bucket. You go and watch some of and everybody looks good in their highlight clip. You're not putting the turnovers in there, but he made some tough shots. And I think you put him in an offensive system that actually like incentivizes ball movement. It's going to create some catch and shoot looks for him. I think he should be a really natural fit. And this is kind of a general discussion, so it's hard to like pinpoint this is exactly what they need to accomplish, but I've talked a lot about the fans needing to be patient with the buildup of this program. And if you look at like a San Diego State, for instance, the first decade wasn't what it is now, and you could just see like it started with an occasional in a tournament appearance to frequently making the tournament to now it's an expectation we're going to the tournament and we're hoping to make the second weekend. How much success does CSU need to have in these first, we'll say 2 years under Ali to like feel like this is continuing on that upward trajectory? Like, I think you got to give them some leeway, just given how many moving pieces there are. I don't think it should be NCAA tournament or bust, but you obviously don't want to take too big of a dip because you have a momentum right now, and it really does feel like these next 4 or 5 years and going into the Pac-12, like this is kind of a prime window to raise your profile on a national level.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, because most times you have a new coach or a coach taking over a program a lot of times because the program is having problems. So Ali is obviously in the unique situation, which, it's not unheard of, but doesn't happen a ton, of taking over a thriving program, and is tasked with, continuing and elevating that. And now you get, the transfer rankings, CSU's 42nd, best of the Mountain West or whatever it is right now. I asked Ali when I talked to him Wednesday about that. I was like, so how do you kind of view that kind of pressure that, maybe not every first year coach would have. And he said, yeah, someone said to me the other day of like, maybe taper expectations a little bit, pump the brakes on this thing. He goes, what does that mean? He goes, I want to win. I want to win Mountain West championships. I want to be in NCAA tournaments. Obviously, that's what coach says, but I kind of appreciate the idea of like, why on earth should we accept a lull because I'm a first year coach? So I think that's where that program is at now. Of yeah, it's an expectation to they're not San Diego State yet because like you say, that's decades of building, years and years of it. But that's what you should be trying to do. So does that mean if CSU misses the NCAA tournament this year, the fire Ali bandwagon comes out? No, that's not what I mean. But yeah, within these first couple of years, like there's a lot in place for this program to continue to be good. So yeah, they should have big expectations and be aiming for NCAA tournaments. I think. Again, does that mean I'm guaranteeing they're making it? No, I have no clue. It's hard to say. I like what they've done, but yeah, I think within these, this year, first year of the pack, you need to be making some hay in March. That's just what the program is built to do now.
One of the things that I think will be interesting too is because of what you're now saving on coach's salary, and I know they upped the assistant pool, but like you've got some money to work with in terms of, how do you want to invest in the program, whether that potentially be renovations or increased charter or, just a lot of things. And I'm really interested to see if they can capitalize on this moment because we're going to transition to football here. And one of the things I've talked a lot about was, man, the last decade was just such a massive missed window. You had some momentum going under McElwain. And I'm not saying that you're going to be a 10-win team every year, but you have enough momentum to get the on-campus stadium built because you needed that success for that project to come to fruition. Then you have 2017, which was fun, but we all know how that season played out in the end. And then just a half decade straight of complete irrelevance. And had you been able to even be like just generally competitive, I feel like everybody would have been so excited. And now you're in this weird spot of like, even coming off of an 8-win season, everybody's still waiting for the other shoe to fall. We've talked about this a little bit when I've had you on, but is it too dramatic to say that this is a make or break season for Jay Norvell? Because I don't know. It feels like there's way more pressure than there typically would be coming off of an 8-win season where you beat 2 rivals, which isn't the norm and all of that. But I keep coming back to the quote from Moneyball with Billy Beane where, if you lose the last game of the season, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's even really a question. If it weren't a make or break, it would be, they would have signed him to a contract extension. Like it's that simple. Like that, the fact that hasn't happened, I think tells you all you need to know. Now that doesn't mean that, that the axe is hanging over his office.
Yeah.
But it means that, yeah, clearly administration wants to make sure the winning continues. With we all know that CSU got a bit of a scheduling break last year and mostly took advantage of it. Obviously, you would have liked to go undefeated in conference play, but that's still tricky to do. Losing at Fresno State's not an embarrassment like some people seem to think it is. But you need to keep winning heading into the pack. There, again, it's just not a secret. This administration is dead set on being very relevant in the Pac-12 in the, they obviously want to in every sport, but especially the major sports. So yeah, this is a very pressure-filled season. And again, because of some of the other stuff, they added GM, they've done a lot of the, built the off the field, and even on the field with all the coaches they've added. They've put a lot of investment in as a program. So that needs to turn into wins. And so, yeah, it's a high pressure season.
I don't want to take up too much of your time here, but you were the most consistent presence at spring football. I think you were there for, if not just about all of the practices and scrimmages. What's your big takeaway on both sides of the ball?
I think offense, I can see the vision. We're going to need to see it in fall. When you're mostly non-live, like you are in camp, like I know they do. some, but it's still facing your teammates. It's just different. But you can see the way that instead of kind of one big star like a Tory, kind of leading everything, it's cuts in a million ways. You have 3, 4 different receivers with 300 to 500 yards. You have a couple tight ends with a bunch of yards. You have some running backs with both yards and catches. Kind of multi-purpose. You could see how the diversity of this offense, if it clicks, could be really tricky. How will it execute? We don't know. We'll see. We don't even know exactly how play calling is going to go because they've been coy on that, and a little bit of everyone had a part. Not everyone, but there were multiple people having a part in that. And then defensively, again, we won't know how successful, but it's going to look so different. They're going to be so aggressive. A lot of bodies at the quarterback, a lot of different type of things that they do. Actual press man coverage after talking about for a couple of years. It's going to look a lot different. I think it's going to be a high risk, high reward type defense. But if they're top 3 in the Mountain West in sacks and turnovers forced, that ups the trajectory of this team for sure. So I'm very intrigued to see what that defense looks like.
If you would have asked me after the first half of camp, what does CSU need to do in the portal? I would have said, without Lewis Brown, you probably could use another receiver. They went out and got one. Felt like they could use another edge rusher. I think Evans is going to be a stud, but just if you're going to play that aggressive, you need multiple bodies that you can throw out. They go out and add Paul Tangelo. They've now since added a kicker. To me, like those are the most glaring positional needs. Is there anywhere else you feel like, they could probably use another guy?
Yeah, I think up front, potentially both sides. I think D line, I wouldn't be surprised. It sounds to me like they either have or will have some guys visiting in that position because I think you like the group there. They're pretty decent, but you probably just don't have the depth that you would like. So I'd say D line potentially. O line is kind of one of those always you can add more. Like I don't think there's ever been O line coach that feels like they have enough depth. And for good reason. It's a tough physical position. So I think the trenches is probably the last spot. But yeah, when you look at what they've added, they're plugging holes. I know no one really likes to talk about a kicker unless it's really good or really bad. But in spring, it was not good, one. And they addressed it in a big way. You look at Hankins' resume, and he's been really good. I'll be curious to hear from him on why he's leaving Baylor and all that. But he has a great resume. So, and obviously, the altitude factor, he seems like he could be really good at CSU. So they plugged a hole there that was, pretty glaring as well. So, no, I think they've done a good job. I'm going to need to sit down. It's going to take some time, obviously. But I think when you evaluate the losses overall and the gains overall, I think they've probably added more experience than they lost, which when the portal opened in December, I wasn't sure that's what it was going to look like.
Are you surprised they brought in Taj Bullock? And he's not going to push Braden for QB1 or anything like that, but
yeah,
maybe he adds a wrinkle to the offense.
I didn't necessarily expect it, although, I started thinking, they ran that Wildcat pretty good amount last year in short down yardage and goal line situations. Usually it was Avery Morrow taking snaps. So I'm presuming some of it will be, that's what he'll run, those type of packages. And then the fact that he is, he's not, the best gunslinger in the world, but, he's a quarterback. So you could throw some wrinkles in there where the defense has to be honest on a passing play. So I did not expect it for sure. But again, looking at it, I'm like, that may be what this offense is, just beat you in a million different ways rather than one specific dominant force. So it's going to be intriguing on how they're going to use Bullock. But he only has 1 year. I can't imagine he's coming to a place that that didn't lay out a pretty clear path on how he's going to see the field.
Last thing I'm going to ask you, and then I'll let you get out of here. It's May, take everything with a grain of salt in terms of commentary, projections, a lot like you said about basketball. So much is still to be sorted out on the football side when it comes to the 2 deep and who's going to be a starting free safety and all that type of stuff. what is the floor of what this team needs to accomplish? We said it's a make or break year. I don't foresee CSU going into a new conference with a lame duck situation. Maybe they would, but that would really surprise me.
Same.
What do they have to do this year?
To extend Norvell.
Yeah.
I'd say probably minimum 7 wins. Yeah. Part of me wants to say even minimum 8, but I'll go a little safer of 7. It depends on who you beat, how you beat them, what injury situation, all that type of jazz. But if things are quote unquote normal-ish, as far as what you would expect in a season, and they go 6-6, I feel like change could happen. I think this admin wants more than you scrape together, the last bowl qualifier in the country. So to me, I think get to 7 and the conversation gets interesting. I think 6 or certainly below 6, and they would make change. I think 8 and above most likely would be an extension, certainly above, like if you're talking 10 wins out. Yeah, the only way there would be changes if Norvell's choosing to leave elsewhere at 10 wins.
It's a big year. It's going to be really fun to see how all this plays out.
And so fascinating. You look at the non-con. I mean, you can probably tuck your way into every game in both directions, except maybe UNC. That pretty much should be a guaranteed win. But Washington's had a crazy offseason. Washington State has had an even crazier offseason. UTSA is pretty good. So very fascinating.
Much like my good friend Kevin Lytle. Always great to have him on the show. I will try and have him on the show throughout the summer as well. I mean, there aren't as many folks as locked into CSU as Kevin and I are, so it's always fun when we get to go back and forth, when I get to pick his brain a little bit. I'm going to touch on a couple of things he said. I think we should start with the grand scheme of things, which is the pressure on this program to succeed going into this season. I think there's realistic reason for optimism. And, Sean in the Toyota chat says the play calling has to be better. I think this team will be better than others. The energy in spring practices seems different in a good way. I do think there was a good vibe around the practices, just in terms of the energy and seemingly like the state of the locker room. I have been around programs where it's very clear that most of the people in the building do not love each other. And I don't think it's a situation like that. I think you've got some guys that have been through it together and really are, looking to break through, but it's results business. And as much as I've talked up Jay Norvell over the years, and I do genuinely think he's a good football coach, and I think what he has done to stabilize this program compared to where it was at a couple of years ago, it's highly impressive. I mean, he inherited a true dumpster fire. This was not what Bobo inherited post McElwain, not even close. I don't even think it was what Fairchild inherited post Sonny, which was actually a pretty good team. That 2008 team obviously went on to win a bowl game and had a pretty fun year. It was a mess, and he's done a great job of getting this program back in a competitive standpoint. But the expectation, particularly with the looming move to the Pac-12, is to compete at the highest level. You're far too invested in football to look at an 8-5 season with a bowl loss to a MAC team and be content with it. Now, there was a lot of positive this past year. It was a step in the right direction. It just can't be the final step. That can't be the ceiling for the program, is what I've consistently argued. And a lot like what Kevin said, I don't think it's sensationalistic or anything like that, because if there weren't some doubts from the administration, Norvell would have already locked down a contract extension. I think that's just the reality. I mean, he won 8 games. He beat Wyoming and Air Force. But I think if you're the administration, you look at how the season ended with the bowl, you look at the program not even showing up against CU. Texas was one thing, but to completely lay an egg against CU, first Rocky Mountain Showdown in Fort Collins since '96, to have that game go the way it did, that mattered. And then obviously with the way the season ended, like that's the last taste you have in your mouth. I think they've got to win 7-8 games, like Kevin said. I think factored into that, you have to have some rivalry wins as well. I think if you won 7 games, but you didn't win a single trophy. No Rocky Mountain Showdown this year, but if you lost to both Wyoming and Air Force, I mean, I think that would matter. Wyoming more so than Air Force. I've said a bunch of times over the years that quote unquote rivalry gets overblown to an extent. I don't think it's a matchup that either side is going to lose sleep over not playing annually or anything like that. But there's legitimate pressure to succeed, and that's why it's big that the staff has gone out and they've addressed some of these very obvious, positional needs that the Rams had in the spring. I think going into spring, there was some real concern. There was just so much unknown. You have a new defensive scheme. You lost multiple guys who were projected starters to the portal. Then even the Lewis Brown situation, and it's like, oh God, like, what is this team going to be? But I think the guys that were here for spring that they brought in through the portal, Rocky Beers at tight end, Jaquez Evans, edge rusher, those guys appear to pass the eye test. They seem like good fits, both from a football standpoint and just from a leadership standpoint, how they conduct themselves as men. I like that. But I did feel like they were light in the interior. So going out and adding, a 300-pound plus defensive tackle from Kentucky, I love that. Get some size, get some experience there. And then at kicker, again, I meant to talk about Isaiah Hankins. Hankins or Hankins, I've heard it pronounced both. Hankins would seem correct to me, but I've heard it said both ways on TV. He's a guy who started 3 or 4 years at Baylor. I'm not sure if there was an injury situation his sophomore year or if he just got replaced at one point. I did notice that at one point last season, after he missed what would have been a game-clinching field goal for Baylor in that crazy game against CU in Boulder, I temporarily lost the starting gig before getting it back. So maybe, despite the fact that he had a pretty good year, 14 and 19 on field goal attempts, about 73%. If you're at 75% as a college kicker, solid. You make 3 out of every 4 kicks. You've got range. I'll take that. One of them was blocked too. It's really more like 14 of 18 on his part. Had a long of 51 this past year, but as a career long of 55 yards. So he's got a boot, and you got to assume that kicking at altitude, that should only benefit him. He's 46 of 65 overall, coming back to 2021. Didn't miss a kick under 40 yards this past year. You love that. I hit a game winner against TCU. So while he, wasn't able to close the door on CU, got to make up for it in a rivalry game against TCU for them. When he missed last year from the kicks that I could see tend to push it left. So that could be something to keep an eye on, maybe just trying to overkick at times, hopefully at altitude. Doesn't have to worry about that. I'm not a kicking expert. I'm just telling you what I saw when I watched him. But I love that he's got a big leg. I love that he's got multiple years of starting experience under his belt. He's not going to be a freshman out there, getting caught up in the lights and, for lack of a better term, shitting bricks when the pressure sets in. He's been in that moment. He's had to kick field goals with games on the line in the Big 12 in a stadium full of people. I feel so much more comfortable about the position based on, it was a limited sample size, but based on what we had seen in spring, I felt like it was probably CSU's most glaring need. And I wouldn't have said basically every time we talked about positional needs that I didn't think the starting kicker was on the roster. If, that wasn't matching what we were seeing, don't ever try and be over dramatic or anything like that. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the other kickers on the roster, but coming off of a couple year stretch here, we had Jordan Noyes, and it was a legitimate strength for you. Special teams as a whole was a strength for this team. That was a concern of mine, just given that you were going to have new specialists at kicker and punter. You lose your best kick returner and Torrey Horton. There's just a lot of question mark. And to add somebody who's, been in college for 4 years, probably earned his degree at this point. He actually had a kid this past season as well. So we at CSU love kickers with babies. Hey, I think once you can go through having a child, the pressures of college football probably seem a little less daunting. You've got real life to worry about and things that are far more important, than college sports. But I'm very intrigued, and a lot like Kevin said, I will be very curious to pick his brain and ask him, what went behind the decision to leave Baylor. And I do wonder if it maybe stems from earlier in the 2024 season where they jerked him around a little bit and maybe didn't show the faith in him that he felt he had earned at that point in his career. This is total speculation on my part. Just, I could see that though. You're a guy you'd kicked for multiple years. You're the guy. You get a knee-jerk reaction because of one missed kick. I lose my job because of that, and then you have to go right back to me when the other guy can't cut it. That wouldn't surprise me, but we shall see. We got a question here in the Toyota chat. We are going to overtime, so if you're tuning in on TV, go over to thednvr.com to check out the rest. If you're watching on online or anything like that, you're good. But Henry says, Justin, random question, what are your thoughts on grit on the helmet bumper? In Henry's opinion, he thinks it looks silly. And who are we reminding to have grit? The opponent. Our helmets could be so clean without it. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. I think a lot of programs put some type of mantra or, team slogan on their helmet. It's a thing that Jay has always done back to his time at Nevada. It's the mentality that he wants his players to embrace. It's a part of the branding. Is it necessary? Probably not. And I would agree with you that maybe it would look a little bit cleaner just to have it plain or have it say Rams or something like that. But it's not something that I feel particularly passionate about. It's certainly very common in college football. So that would be my 2 cents on all of that. Before we got out of here, this is very random, but I've had a couple of people reach out about it. I said on the show on Wednesday that I wasn't sure if Field of Dreams is a sports movie. I did not mean that it's a bad movie. In fact, it's one of my all-time favorites. It's top 5 for me, probably. Definitely one of my most watched movies. I just think it's more about a tale of a son and the regret that he had over the relationship with his dead father. And obviously baseball is an integral part of the storyline. It is a sports movie, but it's not like For the Love of the Game or something like that, where there's a ton of on-field action and stuff like that. But I was just killing time, if we're being real. This wasn't a passionate take of mine or anything like that. Anyways, that's all I've got. I appreciate everybody for rocking with us. I appreciate Kevin Lytle for coming on the show. Shout out to all of our great partners. I appreciate everybody not immediately tuning out when we had some technical issues. Live TV, baby. Things happen. Shout out to Tiffany, our producer, making all of this happen. Could not do it without her. Much love, y'all. We are always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.